The house on Russell Cave Road wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary. Reverend John K. Barnes, 47 years of age, was a respected Episcopal priest in Lexington, Kentucky, known for his quiet discipline and decades of service to Christ Church Cathedral. The white-paneled house sat back from the road, surrounded by open grass and thick Kentucky trees that closed in like curtains after dark. Inside, the walls were lined with family photos, church bulletins, and football trophies. His daughter Francine, 18, was an honor student planning to study journalism at UK. His son Johnny, 14, played defense on the school team and kept his cleats by the back door. Their mother, Mary Agnes Barnes, had left the day before for a church convention in Louisville. She was due home the next day, unaware that her family would soon be gone and her house would turn into a tomb. Wilmer E. Scott, 35, had been in and out of prison since he was 16. Born in Chattanooga, Tennessee, he was already serving a life sentence for a brutal 1972 rape and kidnapping and had a violent history that stretched across 3 states. In court, he once said, "If I get out, I'll kill again. That's not a threat, it's just who I am." William Sloan, 24, was raised in Louisville and had a long record of car thefts and assaults, but nothing like Scott's trail of blood. In lockup, Sloan had attached himself to Scott, and the two formed a volatile partnership. On October the 2nd, 1973, they were part of a group of 18 inmates, transferred on foot from the county jail to the Lexington Federal Building. Somehow, someone slipped the hacksaw blade into the mix, and the 2 men used it to cut through a window bar on the 3rd floor. They jumped from the building, rolled off the roof, and disappeared into the city with barely a sound. Their first stop was the Sayre School. It was pickup time, and 42-year-old Geraldine Ewalt was waiting in her car when the 2 men yanked the door open and climbed in. She was forced at gunpoint to drive them home, where her children were tied up, but ultimately left unharmed. They stole a .22 rifle, kitchen knives, and a few dollars before taking her car and vanishing. They drove directly to the Barnes residence, where the front door was likely unlocked like most homes in that neighborhood back then. Francine was home alone when they entered. She was raped and murdered before her father and brother ever made it back from football practice. Reverend Barnes was shot in the foot and forced to watch. Johnny was shot and left face down in the toilet. Their bodies were piled in the bathroom like garbage, an act meant to shame the dead as much as kill them. After the murders, the 2 men sat down in the Barnes kitchen and made themselves dinner. They washed dishes, wiped their hands, and lingered in the house like nothing had happened. When they left, they took the family car and headed 80 miles north to Falmouth, Kentucky. At Fisher's Motel, they pretended to be federal agents and forced the clerk, 64-year-old Elva Harper, to open 2 guest rooms. In one, they shot David Stidham and Wendell McKenzie, who survived. In the other, they executed brothers David and Monroe Sizemore, construction workers from Hazard. Harper was also murdered before they fled again, this time in the Sizemore's stolen car. Around 2 a.m., Sergeant Jack Westwood spotted the speeding vehicle. Instead of approaching, he held his gun steady and kept his distance behind the open door of his cruiser. Later, Scott would admit they planned to shoot him too, but never got the chance. In the patrol car, Scott opened his mouth. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," he told the officer. "Today I shot a man, a woman, and a child in Lexington." Police had no idea about the Barnes killings until that moment. When they arrived at the house on Russell Cave Road, they found blood across the floors and the family's bodies decomposing in the bathroom. Francine's clothing was torn away. Johnny was still in his football jersey. Mary Agnes Barnes came home to a funeral, not a house. She sold the property and later built a concrete fortress on Lakeshore Drive, with no doors on the first floor and no windows. The only way inside was a single steel elevator. Some said it looked like a bunker, but it was the only place she ever slept again. But in truth, it was a shelter built by a woman who'd seen what monsters do when they walk through your front door. The mobile home sat quiet off Route 37 on the cold evening of November the 18th, 1987, its windows dark against the empty fields near Ina, Illinois. When deputies entered, nothing looked disturbed until they found the bed. Elaine Dardeen lay tucked beneath the covers, alongside her 3-year-old son, Peter, and a newborn girl who hadn't been alive more than minutes. Elaine had been beaten so severely during the attack that she'd gone into labor before dying. All three had been killed with a Louisville slugger, the same bat Keith had given his son for his birthday. It was still in the room. Duct tape covered Elaine's mouth. Nothing was stolen, no signs of forced entry. The killer or killers had stayed long enough to clean the scene and arrange the dead as if tucking in a family for the night. There were no bloody footprints, no mess. Just something so brutal it crossed into the unnatural. Keith Dardeen was missing, along with his red Plymouth. Cops feared the worst, but standard protocol kicked in. They searched for him as the suspect. The next day, a group of hunters found his body dumped in a frozen field near Rend Lake College, not far from home. He had been shot 3 times, once in the face, and castrated with such violence that detectives called it ritualistic. Blood saturated the passenger seat of his car, which had been parked outside the Benton police station. No fingerprints, no footprints, and no answers. In a county already reeling from 15 murders in 2 years, the Dardeens' deaths tipped it into chaos. The local coroner said it wasn't random. It was personal, but that only made it worse. It wasn't just murder. It was a message no one could read, delivered in silence and rage. People in Jefferson and Franklin counties went into full-blown fear mode. Gun shops sold out of ammo. Parents escorted teens from basketball games to the car like it was wartime. Satanic panic crept in quickly. Rumors of ritual sacrifice, mutilation, even cult involvement. But no candles, no symbols, no messages were found at the scene. The truth was colder than any ritual. Someone had entered that trailer, taken control, and destroyed a family with methodical brutality. Keith and Elaine were church-going, frugal, and cautious. He'd once refused to let a young woman use their phone at night, fearing trouble. The same man was now allegedly inviting drifters home from truck stops. That's what Tommy Lynn Sells later claimed. Not everyone bought it. The town didn't just lose a family, it lost its sense of what was safe and what was real. Sells was a transient serial killer, known for hopping trains and spinning lies. While on death row in Texas, he confessed to the Dardeens' murders 3 different times with 3 different stories. One said Teeth invited him for dinner in a threesome. Another said it was a random attack. A third placed Sells wandering off a freight line, knocking on the Dardeens' door under the guise of buying the trailer. He couldn't keep his details straight. Some thought he wanted to delay his execution by stacking up murder confessions, like poker chips. Keith's mother, Joanne, wanted to believe it was him until she saw the holes. The seat where Keith was allegedly shot didn't match the evidence, and if Keith wouldn't let a teen girl in to make a call, why would he let Sells in? Worse, Sells couldn't even describe how Elaine was found without guessing.
The crime happened in this mobile home in 1987. Investigators say the Dardeen family was brutally murdered. Elaine and their son Peter were bound and beaten to death. Elaine, 7 months pregnant at the time, prematurely gave birth during the beating to a little girl who was also killed.
In a situation like that, if the husband's missing, he's the one that did it. And of course, they could not find him, they could not locate him.
It rattled me, I'll be the first to admit, it rattled me completely, you know. But I said, there's no way I could even give any credibility to that thought whatsoever, because I knew he couldn't have done that.
I think they made Keith witness what happened, because the duct tape was removed, and Keith was taken about a mile away, shot execution style.
I believe somebody wanted him to do something, and I believe that he flat out refused.
To brutally murder Elaine, their son, and that baby that was born in the process says to me that that person is very cold, calculating, totally heartless individual. I just can't even tell you who could do something like that.
This man, detectives say, confessed to committing one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Jefferson County, Illinois. He's a 35-year-old drifter named Tommy Lynn Sells.
Well, this is a small community where everybody knows everybody, and it'll be a relief to all the community to know that the person responsible for this or been accused of this, and we got to realize he is not guilty until he's been proven guilty in court.
Investigators say Tommy Lynn Sells is a serial killer. The 35-year-old drifter is already accused of murders in Kentucky, Arizona, Texas, Southwest Missouri, and now suspected in Illinois.
To this day, the Dardeen case is officially unsolved. The family was buried in Mount Carmel, the town Keith had wanted to return to before it was too late. Some investigators still call Sells their best lead, but he was executed in 2014 without ever being charged. Joanne Dardeen never got a conversation with him. Maybe she didn't want it anymore. The things he said don't match up with what I know about Keith, she said. There was no robbery, no forced entry, no affair, just a perfect storm of brutality in a place that already felt like it was cracking at the edges. And the worst part, the killer might still be out there, waiting, watching, knowing he got away with something most can't even speak aloud. Ina never recovered, and the bed where the family died was never burned. It was buried. It was just before sunrise on July the 1st, 1981, when LAPD officers responded to a call at 8763 Wonderland Avenue, a split-level townhouse tucked deep in the Hollywood Hills. What they found inside stunned even the most hardened homicide detectives. 4 people, Ron Launius, Billy Deverell, Joy Miller, and Barbara Richardson, had been beaten to death with blunt instruments. Only one person survived, Susan Launius, Ron's wife, found barely breathing beside her husband's body. She would live, but suffered permanent amnesia, brain trauma, and the loss of part of a finger. Police compared the blood-soaked scene to the Manson murders, both in brutality and symbolic violence. The home was silent, wrecked, and strangely cold. Someone had come, not just to kill, but to make a point. And in Laurel Canyon, that meant someone powerful had been crossed. 2 nights earlier, the victims had made a dangerous move. Members of the Wonderland gang had robbed Eddie Nash, a wealthy Los Angeles nightclub owner with connections to organized crime. Armed and reckless, they stole antique firearms, drugs, jewelry, and cash worth over $1.2 million. Nash's bodyguard, Gregory Dials, was shot during the invasion. Nash, humiliated and furious, suspected the inside job was made possible by adult film star John Holmes, who had visited his house multiple times that morning. Holmes, strung out and desperate for cocaine, was said to have left the patio door unlocked. Days later, Holmes was seen wearing one of Nash's stolen rings. He was taken to Nash's house, allegedly beaten and threatened until he gave up the names of the gang. One account claimed Holmes was tied to a chair, silent at first until the threats got personal, and he gave them what they wanted. Despite the blood trail and the print Holmes left on Ron's headboard, the case became a legal nightmare. Holmes was arrested and charged with 4 counts of murder in 1982, but his defense team convinced the jury he had been forced to open the door for the killers. He was acquitted, but served 110 days for contempt after refusing to testify. In 1988, just before Holmes died of AIDS, his ex-wife Sharon told the Los Angeles Times he'd confessed to being there, saying he stood in the corner and watched it happen. Eddie Nash and Gregory Diles were tried in 1990, but walked after a hung jury in a failed retrial. Years later, in a 2001 plea deal, Nash admitted to sending men to recover stolen property, knowing things could turn violent. He was fined $250,000 and served just 4 years. Diles died in 1997 from liver failure. By then, much of the original Wonderland crew was dead, and the truth had gone quiet. The townhouse at 8763 Wonderland still stands. It's been remodeled, rented, and relisted, but some locals say the energy never left. Visitors report lights flickering, cold spots, or the sensation of being watched. Ghost tour companies now included among LA's most haunted locations, citing not just the unsolved crime, but the layers of Hollywood sin tied to its history: drugs, the trail, porn, and power. The 2024 MGM Plus docu-series, hosted by crime author Michael Connelly, revisited the case in chilling detail, but even that couldn't solve it. No one was ever convicted of the murders. And the deeper you dig, the more twisted it gets. Do you believe Eddie Nash gave the order, or was Holmes more involved than he ever admitted? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. The white French provincial-style house on South 24th Street in Lincoln, Nebraska looked peaceful behind its manicured hedges, a picture of order and wealth. Inside lived Chester Lauer Ward, president of Capital Steel, his wife Clara Ward, their 14-year-old son Michael, and their longtime maid Lillian Fensel. It was a home filled with polished wood, piano, music, books, and mementos from family travels. But on the morning of January the 28th, 1958, that calm was broken when Lillian answered the front door. Standing there was 19-year-old Charles Starkweather with a shotgun, his 14-year-old girlfriend Carol Ann Fugate at his side. He forced Lillian back inside and bound both women. Hours later, convinced Clara was trying to escape, he stabbed her to death upstairs before killing Lillian as well. By the time Chester returned from work, the house had already fallen silent.
Almighty God, I never killed any of them.
It was something that had never happened before.
Lincoln police are at the scene of a gruesome flaying.
They were the 2 most wanted criminals in Nebraska.
Charles Starkweather and Carol Fugate, they were boyfriend and girlfriend.
They killed 11 people.
They were on the run.
It's the new Bonnie and Clyde. This is the first time somebody who was accused of murder was broadcast on television.
It was just a circus. Charles Starkweather, he was a celebrity.
This story permeated popular culture.
Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska.
For romance.
Natural-born killers.
They're true existential heroes.
I'm not a capability.
Carol said that she's being held hostage.
She's a 14-year-old child. She doesn't know what's going on.
The police started part of the false narrative that Carol was in cahoots with this guy.
Romance, love gone wrong, rape and murder.
Girl and gun, even better.
This is a very different story. This isn't a legend. This isn't romance. This was horror.
I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry it happened.
Lauer entered as he always did through the kitchen and into the den, but this time Starkweather was waiting. The shotgun fired, striking him in the temple and neck, followed by a stab to the back. With the family destroyed, Starkweather and Carrill stole the couple's black 1956 Packard and sped west. That same morning, police had uncovered 3 other bodies at a Bennett farmhouse, but news of the Ward murder shook Lincoln to its core. The governor called in the National Guard. Parents carried weapons to escort children to school. Lincoln had never seen fear like it. Neighbors locked their doors in broad daylight. Even longtime residents, who'd never feared a thing, started checking over their shoulders. The Wards were respected, generous, and admired, and their deaths made it clear that no one, not even the city's most prominent citizens, was safe from the killers who seemed to strike without reason. The spree had already claimed lives before the Wards and would take more after. Starkweather had shot a gas station attendant, murdered Carril's parents and baby sister, killed a family friend, and executed teenage couple Robert Jensen and Carol King days after the Wards. He killed a traveling salesman in Wyoming before being captured. At trial, Carril insisted she had been a hostage, while Starkweather called her an accomplice. He was sentenced to death and executed in June 1959. Carril received life but was paroled in 1976. For Lincoln, the loss of Chester, Clara, and Lillian never faded. Michael Ward, just 14 and away at boarding school, never returned to live in the house. He built a life far from Nebraska, but the city never forgot. The murders of January 1958 shattered the illusion of safety, leaving South 24th Street haunted not by ghosts, but by the memory of how one door opened to unimaginable horror. You ever hear of the house on Cielo Drive? It used to sit way up in the hills above Benedict Canyon, quiet, private, almost too far from the city. It had tall dates, thick trees, and a long gravel driveway that curved just enough to keep the place hidden. In 1969, it was being rented by Sharon Tate, who was 26, married to Roman Polanski, and just 2 weeks away from having their first child. She was glowing. 8.5 months pregnant and staying home while Roman finished a film in Europe, but she wasn't alone. Her friends were with her that summer. Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairdresser she'd once dated but stayed close to, Abigail Folger, the coffee heiress, and her boyfriend Wojciech Frykowski, a writer from Poland. That night, August the 8th, they had dinner at El Coyote, came back, played music, turned down the lights. It was calm until 4 people started up the hill, and the night took a turn no one could come back from. They came just after midnight, 4 of them, Tex Watson in front, followed by Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. They weren't after Sharon. She didn't even know who they were. They were sent by Charles Manson, who told them to do something witchy at the house. He believed a man who once lived there, music producer Terry Melcher, had humiliated him. But Melcher had moved out. Sharon and Roman were just renting the place. That didn't matter. Watson had a .22 revolver and a rope. They parked at the bottom of the hill, climbed the embankment near the gate, and slipped through the dark without being seen. Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old visiting the caretaker in the guest house, pulled out of the driveway and never made it past them. He was shot 4 times in his car. The group made their way toward the house, and by the time they stepped inside, the night had already turned. Watson cut a screen, crawled through a window, and let the others in through the front door. The victims were all still awake. Frykowski was on the couch. Folger was reading in her room. Sebring was talking with Sharon in the living room. No one had time to run. Watson forced them into one place, tied Sharon and Jay together by their necks, and threw the rope over a ceiling beam. He ordered the others to stay quiet. Jay tried to protect Sharon. He begged them to think of the baby, but Watson shot him, then stabbed him. Frykowski fought back and almost made it outside. Folger was chased onto the lawn. Sharon, 8.5 months pregnant, pleaded to live long enough to have her child. She offered herself as a hostage. She said they didn't need to hurt anyone, but the rope stayed around her neck, and when it ended, she was still alive just long enough for the blood loss to take everything. At 8:30 the next morning, housekeeper Winifred Chapman walked through the front gate and saw the bodies. She ran screaming to the neighbor's house and called the police department. The crime scene stunned even seasoned LAPD officers. Nothing had been stolen, and their phones were dead. The word PIG was smeared on the front door in blood. The rope still hung from the beam. At first, investigators thought it might be drug-related, but they found no trace of anything like that. Roman Polanski flew home from London still in shock and allowed Life magazine to photograph him in front of the blood-stained door. He wasn't trying to make a statement. He was looking for answers, but no one had any yet. And that canyon so quiet the night before suddenly felt like the edge of something much darker. The case began to unravel when Susan Atkins, jailed on another charge, quietly confessed to her cellmates that led to the arrests of Manson, Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten. In 1971, all were convicted of murder. Sharon Tate was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, dressed in her wedding gown. In her arms lay her unborn son, Paul Richard Polanski, just 2 weeks from his due date. A special casket was made, so mother and child could rest together, never separated again. Linda Kasabian, who stood outside the house and never entered, testified against the others in exchange for immunity. The death sentences were overturned in 1972 and replaced with life in prison. The house on Cielo Drive was torn down in 1994, but the memory of that night still lingers in the hills above Los Angeles, quiet as a breath that never came. If this one stayed with you, you're not alone. Hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who doesn't scare easy. We'll keep the stories coming, and some of them, they never really end until dawn.